The orc woman standing on the weathered wooden platform had been counting the dust motes in the afternoon light for the better part of an hour, and when the distant rumble of wagon wheels finally echoed across the empty grassland, her heart lurched so violently she thought her rib cage might crack. Fara Zenn smoothed down the front of her travel dress for the 100th time that day, acutely aware that the pale blue fabric was meant to soften her appearance, to make her green skin seem less jarring, her small tusks less pronounced. The way station keeper, a weathered human man who had said perhaps 6 words to her since dawn, glanced up from his whittling and grunted something that might have been encouragement or indigestion. The caravan crawled closer, 3 wagons pulled by tired oxen, their canvas covers stained with the red dust of the frontier roads. Fara's fingers twisted in her skirt. Somewhere in those wagons was Bennett Quillen, the man who had answered her family's advertisement, who had exchanged letters with her father, who had agreed to marry an orc woman sight unseen in exchange for the considerable dowry her merchant father could provide. She had memorized the single sketch he had sent, practiced saying his name until it felt almost familiar in her mouth. The first wagon stopped. A family climbed down, children tumbling out like puppies, their mother calling after them in a sharp voice. Not him. The second wagon disgorged an elderly couple, and a trader with more luggage than seemed reasonable for one person. Still not him. Fara felt her throat tighten as the third wagon came to rest, dust settling around its wheels in golden clouds lit by the lowering sun. 3 passengers emerged. 2 were clearly together, a young human couple who immediately began arguing about their trunks. The third figure descended last, moving with a careful slowness that suggested sore muscles from days of travel. He was tall but not unusually so, perhaps just over 6 feet, with dark hair that badly needed cutting and several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. His clothes were work-worn but clean, and he carried only a single travel pack slung over one broad shoulder. He looked around the empty platform, his gaze skipping past her once, then jerking back with visible surprise. He walked toward her, and Fara straightened her spine, lifting her chin despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. This was not how she had imagined this moment. In her mind, he would have recognized her immediately, would have smiled, would have made this less awkward somehow. "Miss Zenn." His voice was rough, uncertain. "Yes, you are Bennett Quillen." But even as she said it, she felt something sink inside her chest. He looked nothing like the sketch, and his expression was all wrong, shadowed with something that might have been guilt or grief. "No." He set down his pack with a thud that seemed too loud in the empty space between them. "No, I'm Bennett Quillen. Brennan's my brother." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Fara heard them, understood each one individually, but together they made no sense. She looked past him at the wagons, at the other passengers collecting their belongings, at the empty platform stretching away into the golden grass that surrounded the station on all sides. "I don't understand," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. Bennett Quillen rubbed a hand over his face, and in that gesture Fara saw exhaustion and something deeper, a weariness that had nothing to do with travel. "Can we sit down? I've been practicing what to say for 3 days straight, and I'm likely to make a mess of it anyway." The station keeper had a bench near his post, and they sat there as the caravan began pulling away, heading for the larger settlement another day's travel west. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Fara folded her hands in her lap and waited, feeling the last shreds of her hope unraveling like cheap thread. "My brother left 2 weeks ago," Bennett said, staring at his boots. "Took a ship south to the coastal cities." Left me a letter explaining that he couldn't go through with it, that he was sorry, that he hoped you would understand. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, along with a small leather purse that clinked with the sound of coins. He sent your return fare. Wanted me to make sure you got it, and to apologize in person because you deserved that much at least. Fara took the envelope with numb fingers. The paper felt ordinary, disappointingly so, as if it should have been heavier, more substantial to carry such weight. He never intended to come. I don't think he knew what he intended until the end. Brennan's always been like that, making plans then panicking when they become real. Bennett's voice carried an edge of old frustration, the kind that comes from watching someone you love make the same mistakes over and over. Not that it's an excuse. He made you a promise. He should have kept it. Why did you come? The question came out sharper than Fara meant it to, but she was holding on to her composure by her fingernails, and the anger was easier than the humiliation that threatened to swallow her whole. You could have sent the letter with the caravan, saved yourself the journey. Bennett finally looked at her, and his eyes were a pale gray that seemed to catch the sunset light. Because leaving you stranded here with nothing but a letter would have been worse. Because someone needed to make sure you got home safe. Because it was the right thing to do, even if I couldn't fix what my brother broke. The simplicity of it startled her. No elaborate justifications, no attempts to minimize the situation. Just a straightforward statement of fact delivered in that rough, tired voice. Fara found she had no immediate response, so she opened the letter instead. Bennett Quillen's handwriting was neat, almost too neat, the words careful and measured. He apologized profusely, explained his doubts, his fears, his ultimate inability to commit to a life he could not picture. He wished her well. He hoped she would find happiness. The letter was perfectly polite and utterly bloodless. He writes like a clerk filling out forms, Fara said, and was startled to hear the faint edge of humor in her own voice, dark and bitter but humor nonetheless. He is a clerk. Bennett's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Works for a shipping company in Milford, or worked. I expect he'll find similar employment wherever he landed. And you, horse breeder, got a ranch up in the high country north and east of here. Nothing fancy, but the grazing is good and I'm building up a decent herd. He gestured vaguely toward the darkening horizon. Which is why I can't stay long. Left my hired man in charge, but I need to get back. The station keeper approached, clearing his throat. Caravan's gone. Next one through won't be for 3 days. You two need lodging, 3 days. Fara's stomach dropped. She had enough money for perhaps one night at whatever passed for an inn in this forsaken outpost, and then what? She looked at the purse Bennett had given her, weighed it mentally. Enough to get home, yes, but home to what? To her father's disappointed face, to the whispers among her mother's friends, to the knowledge that even a man who claimed to want an orc bride had ultimately decided she was not worth the risk. There's a town 2 days east, Bennett said slowly. Redstone. Proper coaching inn, general store, weekly mail coach that connects to the main routes. I'm heading that way regardless to get home. If Miss Zenn wants, she could travel with me. Be safer than waiting here, and the inn in Redstone will have better accommodations. The station keeper nodded. Redstone's your best bet, miss. Nothing here but this platform and my shack. Not really set up for guests. Fara looked between them, feeling the trap of her circumstances closing in. Travel alone for 2 days with a strange man. Or wait here in the middle of nowhere with no company, but an uncommunicative station keeper. Neither option was ideal, but at least with Bennett Quillen she would be moving forward, putting distance between herself and this awful platform where her carefully planned future had crumbled to nothing. All right, she said. Thank you. They set out at dawn, After a night spent on opposite sides of the station keeper's tiny guest room, neither of them sleeping well. Bennett had acquired 2 horses from somewhere, sturdy frontier stock with patient eyes. He helped Fara mount, his hand steady and impersonal, then swung onto his own horse with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. The grassland stretched around them in rolling waves of green and gold, broken occasionally by stands of scrubby trees or outcroppings of gray stone. The sky was enormous, impossibly blue, and the silence between them felt equally vast. Fara had never been comfortable with horses, and she focused on staying balanced, on moving with the animal's gait rather than fighting it. "You ride much?" Bennett asked after an hour of quiet. "Not really. My family lives in Milford, mostly cobblestones and crowds. Same place Brennan worked." Bennett's voice was neutral, but Fara caught the implication. "Did you ever think he might have seen me, in the market or on the street? That's why he left." Bennett was quiet for a moment, guiding his horse around a patch of loose stone. "I thought about it, but Brennan told me he never went looking, never tried to find you before the wedding was supposed to happen. Said he didn't want to make it harder than it already was." "Harder for whom?" "Himself, probably. Like I said, Brennan's good at avoiding difficult things." Bennett pulled his canteen free, took a long drink, then offered it to her. "For what it's worth, I don't think seeing you would have changed his mind. His problem wasn't with you specifically. It was with the whole idea of it, the commitment, the permanence. He'd have run from any bride, orc or human." Fara accepted the canteen, drank, and handed it back. The water was tepid but clean. "That's supposed to make me feel better." "Not particularly. Just trying to be honest." Bennett replaced the canteen, his movements economical and practiced. "You're angry. You've got a right to be." "I'm humiliated," Fara corrected, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I'm 23 years old, and I agreed to marry a stranger because every man in Ford who might have courted me took one look and decided I was too strange, too wrong. And now even the stranger who agreed to marry me sight unseen decided I wasn't worth it." She stopped, horrified at herself. She had not meant to say any of that, certainly not to this man, this stranger who was only helping her because his brother was a coward. But Bennett did not look shocked or uncomfortable. He simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's harder," he agreed. "Harder than just being angry. Anger you can burn through. Humiliation sits in your gut and festers." There was something in the way he said it that made Fara look at him more carefully. "You sound like you know." "Different circumstances, but yeah. Had a woman I was courting back when I was younger, before I started the ranch. Thought we had an understanding. Turned out she had an understanding with 3 other men too, and I was the only one who didn't know. Found out at a barn dance when I overheard her laughing about it with her friends." Bennett's mouth twisted. "Took me a long time to stop feeling like a fool." "What did you do?" "Moved up into the high country, bought land cheap because nobody else wanted to work that hard. Spent 5 years building something that was mine and couldn't be taken away by someone else's whims." He glanced at her, and there was something almost gentle in his expression. "Probably not helpful advice for you, though." "No, but it's honest." Fara surprised herself by smiling slightly. "You seem to value that. It's easier than trying to figure out what people want to hear." They rode on, and the silence that fell between them this time was less oppressive, more companionable. The sun climbed higher, and the day grew warm. Around midday, Bennett called a halt near a creek that cut through the grassland, its banks lined with willows that provided blessed shade. He helped Fara down from her horse, and she could not quite hide her wince as her legs protested the unfamiliar activity. "Sorry," Bennett said. "Should have stopped sooner. You're going to be sore tomorrow." "I'm sore now." Fara limped to the creek, knelt, and splashed cold water on her face. It helped, though not as much as she would have liked. When she turned back, Bennett had laid out a simple meal, bread and cheese and dried meat, along with apples that were only slightly wrinkled. They ate in the dappled shade, watching the horses drink their fill from the creek. A bird called somewhere in the willows, a liquid trill that seemed impossibly cheerful. Fara felt some of the tightness in her chest ease, just slightly, just enough to breathe a little deeper. "Can I ask you something?" Bennett said, breaking the comfortable quiet. "I suppose." "Why did you agree to it? The arranged marriage, I mean. You said you're 23. That's young. You could have waited, found someone on your own terms." Fara considered the question, turning it over in her mind. "How old are you?" 28. "And you're still alone, even after you built your ranch. Is that because you want to be, or because it's easier than trying again?" Bennett huffed a quiet laugh, acknowledging the hit. "Fair point." "I'm an orc woman in a human city," Fara said, her voice steady now. The words one she had thought many times but rarely spoken aloud. "I can count on one hand the number of orc families in Milford, and most of them have sons already spoken for or daughters I've known since childhood. The human men who might consider courting an orc woman are usually either fetishists who want a savage fantasy, or they're desperate and think I'll be grateful for any attention. Neither is appealing. And Brennan's letter didn't sound like either of those. His letter was careful, respectful. He talked about wanting a partnership, about building a life together. He admitted he lived in a rural area and that finding a wife was difficult for him too. Fara pulled apart a piece of bread, watching the crumbs fall. "It seemed like an honest transaction. I would get a husband and a home. He would get a wife and my father's money. Everyone would get what they needed. Except you didn't get what you needed." "No." She met his gaze directly, chin lifted. "I got you instead, and I don't know what to do with that." Bennett's expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for Fara to identify them all, but what settled at the end was something that looked almost sad. "I'm not trying to replace him. I'm just trying to get you somewhere safe so you can go home and figure out what comes next." "I know." And she did know that, intellectually. But there was something else happening here, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. This man, this rough-spoken horse breeder who had traveled days out of his way to deliver an apology that was not his to make, was nothing like what she had expected from a Quillen. He was direct where his brother was evasive, present where his brother had fled, and there was a steadiness to him that made her feel less like she was falling apart. She could not afford to feel this way. She had been humiliated enough without developing feelings for the brother of the man who had jilted her. That way lay madness, or at least more heartbreak, and she had reached her limit for both. They mounted up again and rode through the afternoon, following a track that was barely more than a suggestion worn into the grass. Bennett pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, markers that helped him navigate. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he bred for endurance and sure-footedness, about the hired man who helped him and who was probably eating all the bacon right now out of spite. Fara found herself listening, then asking questions, drawn in despite herself. The way Bennett talked about his work had an unself-conscious passion to it, a pride that was earned through sweat and long hours. It was attractive in a way that was entirely unexpected, and she caught herself watching his hands on the reins, the easy way he sat his horse, the competence that radiated from him like heat from stones. They made camp that evening as the sun was setting, choosing a spot near another creek where the grass grew thick enough to hobble the horses for grazing. Bennett set up a fire with efficient movements while Fara laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. The proprieties had to be maintained, even here in the middle of nowhere with no one to see. "Can you cook?" Bennett asked, pulling supplies from his pack. Yes, but I'm useless over an open fire. My mother's kitchen has a proper stove. Then you're in for a treat. My camp cooking is legendary, and by legendary, I mean barely edible, but it fills your stomach. Bennett grinned at her, a quick flash of humor that transformed his serious face, and Fara felt her heart do something complicated and inadvisable. The food turned out to be better than advertised, a simple stew made with dried vegetables and salt pork, thickened with flour and seasoned with herbs from a small tin. They ate straight from the pot, passing it back and forth, and the informal intimacy of it felt strange and right all at once. "Tell me about Milford," Bennett said after they had eaten, after the fire had burned down to comfortable coals. "I've only been there twice, and both times I barely saw more than the trading district." So Fara told him about the city she had grown up in, about the crowded markets, and the harbor where ships came in from all over the world, about the university where human and orc scholars worked side by side in wary cooperation, about the tensions that simmered beneath the surface of daily life. She told him about her father's business, importing spices and fabrics, about her mother's careful social navigation, about her younger brother who wanted to be a soldier despite their parents' objections. Bennett listened, asking questions that showed he was paying attention, and as the stars wheeled overhead, Fara realized she was enjoying herself. This strange, accidental journey with this stranger who was not quite a stranger anymore had given her something she had not expected, a pocket of time outside her normal life, where she could simply be herself without the weight of expectations or the sting of rejection. "What will you do when you get home?" Bennett asked finally, his voice quiet in the darkness. Fara was silent for a long moment, staring up at the stars. "I don't know. My father will be kind about it, but he'll be disappointed. He spent months arranging this match, negotiating terms, making sure everything was proper. And my mother will try to hide it, but she'll be thinking about how much harder it will be to find another option now that I've been jilted once. That's what they'll think. What do you want?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through all of Fara's careful defenses. What did she want? Not what her parents wanted for her, not what society expected, but what she herself actually desired. "I want to matter to someone," she said finally, the words raw and honest. "I want someone to choose me, not because I come with a dowry or because I'm a convenient solution to a problem, but because they look at me and think, yes, her, that's who I want to build a life with. I want to be someone's first choice, not their compromise." Bennett was quiet for so long that Fara thought perhaps she had said too much, revealed too much of her heart. But when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You should be," he said. "You should be someone's first choice. You're smart and funny, and you've handled this whole disaster with more grace than most people would have managed. My brother's a fool, and I'm sorry he made you feel like you were anything less than worth choosing." Fara's throat tightened, and she blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears. She would not cry, not now, not in front of this man who had already seen too much of her vulnerability. But the kindness in Bennett's words, the plain sincerity of them, had cut deeper than she expected. "Thank you," she managed, "for saying that, and for all of this. You didn't have to do any of it, I know, but I wanted to." He shifted on his bedroll, and in the dying firelight Fara could see his expression, serious and intent. "Get some sleep. We'll reach Redstone tomorrow afternoon, and you'll have a proper bed and a hot meal." Fara lay down, pulling her blanket up despite the warm night, and listened to Bennett's breathing slow and even out as he fell asleep. She stayed awake longer, staring at the stars and trying not to think about how much she wished this journey would not end. how much she dreaded arriving in Redstone and saying goodbye to this man who had somehow become important to her in the space of 2 days. The morning dawned clear and bright, and they set out early to avoid the worst of the afternoon heat. Fara's legs protested every movement, sore from yesterday's riding, but she gritted her teeth and mounted without complaint. Bennett noticed anyway, because apparently he noticed everything, and he set a slower pace than the day before. They talked more as they rode, the conversation flowing easier now that they had established some level of comfort with each other. Bennett told her stories about his horses, about the time one of his mares had kicked down a fence to get to a neighboring stallion, about the foal that had been born during a snowstorm and nearly died before Bennett managed to get it warm and nursing. Fara told him about her attempt to start a lending library for orc children in Milford, about the resistance she had faced from human families who did not want their children sharing space with orc kids, about the small victories she had won over time. "You're a fighter," Bennett observed. "Quieter than some, but you don't back down." "I've never had the luxury of backing down. The world doesn't make space for people like me. We have to carve it out ourselves. People like you meaning orcs, or people like you meaning stubborn women who start libraries?" Fara laughed, surprised by the question. "Both, I suppose." "Well, for what it's worth, I admire that, the not backing down part." Bennett paused, then added, "And I'm sorry the world makes you fight so hard just to exist in it. That's not right." It was such a simple statement, so plainly delivered, but it made something in Fara's chest crack open. How many times had she heard people say that prejudice was unfortunate, or that things were improving, or that she needed to be patient? But Bennett's words held no qualifications, no excuses. He simply saw the injustice and named it, and that meant more than he probably realized. Redstone appeared on the horizon around midday, a cluster of buildings huddled in a valley where 2 rivers met. It was larger than Fara had expected, a proper frontier town with actual streets and what looked like a town square. The coaching inn was easy to spot, a 2-story building with a painted sign showing a red horse. They rode in slowly, drawing some attention from the people on the street. Fara was used to the stares, the way humans looked at her and saw something other, but here the glances seemed more curious than hostile. Perhaps out here on the frontier, where survival depended more on practical skills than social hierarchies, there was less energy for prejudice. Bennett helped her dismount in front of the inn, his hand steady on her waist, and for just a moment they stood too close, close enough that Fara could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, close enough to smell the scent of horse and leather and clean sweat that clung to him. He stepped back first, clearing his throat, and Fara felt the loss of his nearness like a physical thing. "I'll get you a room," he said, "and then I need to head out. I've been gone too long already." "Of course." Fara forced herself to sound practical, businesslike. "Let me repay you for the horses and the supplies." "No need. I'm heading home anyway. You weren't out of my way." They both knew that was not entirely true. Redstone was on his route, but only barely, and he could have traveled faster and more directly without her. But Fara did not argue, just followed him inside where he spoke with the innkeeper, a stout human woman who looked them both over with sharp eyes but asked no intrusive questions. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that overlooked the street. Bennett carried Fara's small bag up for her, setting it on the chair by the door. In the confined space, the air felt thick with everything they were not saying. "The mail coach comes through on 6th day, Bennett said, not quite looking at her. "You can book passage from there back to Milford. It'll take about a week, maybe less depending on the roads." "Thank you, I'll do that." Fara twisted her hands together, searching for the right words. Bennett, I don't know how to thank you properly. You've been kinder than you had any obligation to be. I wasn't being kind. I was being decent, and there's a difference. He finally met her eyes, and his expression was complicated, layered with things she could not quite read. I hope things work out for you, Fara. I hope you find what you're looking for. He turned to leave, and Fara felt panic rise in her throat. This was it. The moment where this strange interlude ended and she returned to her regular life, sadder and wiser and more alone than before. She could let him walk away, could take the mail coach home and try to rebuild some kind of future from the wreckage of her plans. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. But when had safety ever given her what she truly needed? Wait, she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. What if I didn't go back to Milford? What if I came with you instead? Bennett stopped, his hand on the door frame, and turned slowly. What? You said you have a ranch. You mentioned you have trouble finding help, that hired hands don't stay long in the high country. I could work for you, earn my keep. I'm good with accounts, I can read and write. I could help with the business side of things. The words tumbled out faster now, driven by a conviction that was crystallizing even as she spoke. Or if you don't need that, I can learn other things. I'm not afraid of hard work. Fara, you can't just abandon your life because of one bad experience. I'm not abandoning it. I'm choosing something different. She stepped closer, willing him to understand. 2 days ago, I was willing to move out here and marry a stranger because I thought it would give me a chance at something better than what I had. That hasn't changed just because the stranger turned out to be his brother. Bennett's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it down. That's not fair to either of us. You're upset and your plans fell through and I'm convenient. But I won't be a replacement for Brennan, won't be the second choice you settle for because you've already come this far. You're not second choice, Fara said, and realized as she said it that it was absolutely true. You're the first thing I've chosen for myself in years, maybe ever. My father chose Brennan. My circumstances chose Brennan, but I'm choosing you if you'll have me. Not as an employee, not as a convenience, as someone who wants to see where this goes. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Bennett's jaw worked, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his face, caution warring with something that looked like hope. You barely know me, he said finally, but his voice was rough, uncertain. I know you traveled days out of your way to apologize for someone else's mistake. I know you're honest even when it's uncomfortable. I know you love your work and you're kind to your horses, and you listened when I talked about things that matter to me. Fara took a breath, steadying herself. And I know that when I think about getting on that mail coach and never seeing you again, it feels wrong in a way that has nothing to do with Brennan or the failed arrangement. Bennett closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again they were bright with emotion. This is crazy. You understand that, right? 2 days ago you were supposed to marry my brother. Now you're proposing to come live at my ranch and see where things go between us. People will talk. They'll make assumptions. Let them talk. I've spent my whole life worrying about what people think, what they'll say, how they'll judge me. I'm tired of it, Bennett. I want to try something different. He studied her for a long moment, and Fara felt the weight of that gaze, the way he was really seeing her, really considering what she was offering. Then, slowly, he smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds. All right, he said. All right, yes, come to the ranch. We'll figure it out as we go. The relief that flooded through Fara was so intense it made her dizzy. She found herself smiling back, wide enough that her small tusks showed, and for once she did not care. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Tonight you should rest properly. Get a hot meal. Write a letter to your family explaining what you're doing." Bennett's practical nature reasserted itself, but his eyes were still warm, still holding that promise of something more. "And we should probably talk about expectations, about what this actually means." They went downstairs to the inn's dining room, ordered food that neither of them paid much attention to, and talked. Really talked, laying out the practical realities of what Fara was proposing. Bennett's ranch was remote, a day's hard ride from the nearest settlement. The work was constant, especially during foaling season. The winters were harsh, the summers hot, and entertainment consisted mainly of whatever they made themselves. He would pay her wages if she insisted on working, or she could simply live there as his guest while they figured out the nature of their relationship, whatever that turned out to be. Fara listened to all of it, the warnings and the caveats and the practical concerns, and none of it changed her mind. If anything, the honesty with which Bennett laid out the challenges only reinforced her certainty. This was not a man who would make promises he could not keep or paint false pictures to lure her in. This was someone who would tell her the truth, even when the truth was difficult. She wrote to her parents that evening, struggling to find words that would explain without worrying them unduly. In the end, she settled for a version of the truth, that Brennan had not come, that she had met his brother instead, and that she had decided to stay in the frontier territories for a while to explore other options. She promised to write regularly, to let them know she was safe, and hoped they would understand even if they could not approve. That night, lying in the inn's comfortable bed, Fara felt more at peace than she had in weeks. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was uncertain in an exciting way rather than a terrifying one. She was choosing her own path, taking a risk on something that felt right in her bones even if it defied logic. They left Redstone at dawn, Bennett having resupplied and Fara having purchased a few items of more practical clothing from the general store. The ride north and east took them into higher country, where the grassland gave way to rolling hills covered in pine forest. The air grew cooler, sharper, scented with resin and clean earth. Bennett's ranch appeared late in the afternoon, a cluster of buildings nestled in a high valley where a stream cut through meadowland. The main house was small but sturdy, log built with a stone chimney. The barn was larger, clearly the focus of Bennett's attention and resources, and beyond it, Fara could see fenced pastures where horses grazed, their coats gleaming in the slanting sunlight. A man emerged from the barn as they rode up, lean and weathered with hair going gray at the temples. He looked at Fara with undisguised surprise, then at Bennett with raised eyebrows. "Thomas, this is Fara Zenn. She'll be staying with us for a while. Fara, Thomas Garrett, my hired man and the person who actually keeps this place running when I'm gone." Thomas touched his hat to Fara. "Madam." "Welcome, I suppose, though I admit I'm confused." "That makes 3 of us," Bennett said with a wry smile. "I'll explain later. Right now, I need to check on the horses. Fara, let me show you the house." The house was as practical inside as out. One main room with a kitchen area and sitting space, a bedroom that Bennett clearly used, and a small loft accessible by ladder. Bennett hauled Fara's bag up to the loft, where a simple bed frame held a decent mattress and blankets. "It's not much," he said, looking around the space with critical eyes. "I can get you a proper dresser, maybe a chair, some shelves." "It's perfect," Fara said honestly. The loft had a window that looked out over the pastures, and the space felt cozy rather than cramped. "Really, Bennett?" "It's more than I expected." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition and possibility. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. "Right, well, make yourself comfortable." I need to go deal with the horses before Thomas has my head for disappearing for a week." Fara spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, unpacking her few belongings and exploring the house. It was clean, but obviously the domain of someone who lived alone, practical rather than comfortable. She found herself mentally cataloging small improvements that could be made: curtains for the windows, cushions for the hard chairs, herbs for cooking beyond the bare basics currently in the kitchen. Dinner that night was an awkward affair, with Thomas clearly trying to figure out the situation without asking directly, Bennett deflecting with non-answers, and Fara attempting to be helpful without overstepping. But there was also laughter, especially when Thomas told stories about the chaos that had ensued during Bennett's absence, and by the end of the meal, Fara felt like perhaps this could work, this strange new arrangement. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Bennett worked with the horses from dawn until dusk, training the young ones, checking on the pregnant mares, maintaining fences and equipment. Fara helped where she could, learning as she went. She discovered she had a knack for keeping the account books organized, for tracking bloodlines and breeding schedules, for correspondence with potential buyers. Bennett seemed surprised and pleased by her contributions, often seeking her opinion on business decisions. But there were other moments too, smaller and more significant. The way Bennett would brush past her in the kitchen, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that felt natural and right. The evenings they spent sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. The morning she came down from the loft to find he had made coffee exactly the way she liked it, having paid attention to her preferences without her asking. 3 weeks after Fara's arrival, Bennett asked her to ride out with him to check the far pasture. It was a beautiful day, warm but not hot, with clouds drifting lazy across the sky. They rode in comfortable silence, and Fara marveled at how much more confident she felt on horseback now, how her body had adapted to the constant physical activity of ranch life. The far pasture was empty except for one horse, a gray mare who stood alone near the fence line. Bennett dismounted and approached her slowly, speaking in a low voice. The mare nickered and came to him, and Fara watched as he ran his hands over her sides, checking something. "She's close," he said. "Could foal any time in the next few days. I'll need to check on her regularly. Can I help?" "You can keep me company during night checks, if you don't mind losing sleep." They sat together on the hillside, watching the mare graze. The sun was warm on Fara's face, and she felt content in a way she had never experienced before, a bone-deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with grand ambitions or social approval and everything to do with this moment, this place, this person beside her. "I need to tell you something," Bennett said suddenly. "I've been trying to find the right time, and I don't think there is one, so I'm just going to say it." Fara's heart stuttered. "All right. I'm in love with you." The words came out rough, almost angry, as if he resented them. "I know it's too soon, and I know it's complicated because of Brennan and how all this started, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. I wake up thinking about you, and I go to sleep thinking about you, and every moment in between you're there in my head. And if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. You can stay here as long as you want regardless, but I needed you to know." Fara stared at him, at this man who had stumbled into her life by accident and become the center of it in a matter of weeks. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, and he looked like he was braced for rejection. "Bennett," she said, and waited until he met her eyes. "I fell in love with you on the second day of our journey when you told me I should be someone's first choice, maybe earlier. I've been terrified to admit it, terrified that I was projecting or rebounding or just desperate for any kind of connection. But it's real, what I feel for you. It's the most real thing I've ever felt." The tension drained out of Bennett's shoulders, and his expression transformed into something so openly joyful it made Farah's breath catch. "Yeah, yeah," she smiled, feeling giddy and grounded all at once. "So what do we do now? Now I do this." He leaned in and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper when she responded, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was missing, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," Bennett said, his forehead resting against hers. "Not because of some arrangement or because it's practical, but because I want you in my life forever, because I can't imagine waking up without you anymore. Marry me, Farah." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They stayed on that hillside until the sun began to set, making plans and promises, and when they finally rode back to the ranch, they were holding hands across the space between their horses, neither wanting to break the connection. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, simple and perfect in its simplicity. They stood among the horses in the main pasture, with Thomas serving as witness and a traveling priest who happened through performing the ceremony. Farah wore a dress she had made herself from fabric purchased in Redstone, pale green that brought out the color of her skin. Bennett wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable in it, but his eyes when he looked at her held everything she needed to see. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of partnership and honesty, of choosing each other every day. When the priest pronounced them married, Bennett kissed her in front of the horses and Thomas and the wide sky, and Farah felt like her heart might burst from the fullness of it. That night, after Thomas had tactfully disappeared to his own cabin and the horses were settled, Bennett and Farah lay together in his bed, now their bed, talking in low voices about their future. About the ranch they would build together, about the possibility of children someday, about all the ordinary, extraordinary things that made up a life. "You ever regret it?" Bennett asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "Walking away from your old life, taking such a huge risk?" Farah considered the question seriously, because Bennett deserved her honesty. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it took someone else's cowardice to get me here, but I don't regret the choice itself. I'm happier than I've ever been. This feels right in a way nothing else ever has." "Good." Bennett pulled her closer and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because I'm keeping you. No returns, no exchanges. I believe that's supposed to be my line, given that you're technically a replacement groom." "Replacement groom," Bennett repeated, laughing. "That's one way to describe how we got here." "How would you describe it?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Lucky," he said finally. "Improbable and complicated and probably crazy, but lucky. The luckiest thing that ever happened to me." Farah smiled in the darkness, listening to the sound of Bennett's heartbeat beneath her ear, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Outside, the horses moved quietly in their pastures, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. This was her life now, this ranch in the high country, this man who had chosen her as freely as she had chosen him, this future they would build together one day at a time. She had gone to that station platform expecting to meet her arranged husband, prepared to make the best of a practical solution to her loneliness. Instead, she had found something infinitely better, a partnership born not from necessity but from genuine affection, a love that was freely given and freely returned. The last passenger off that wagon had not been the man she needed in the way she expected. He had been something better, something truer, and as Farah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she sent a silent thank you to the universe for Bennett Quillen's cowardice, because it had given her this, given her Bennett, given her a happiness she had not known to hope for. The failed arrangement was long behind them now, forgotten in favor of the life they were creating together. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the horses dreamed in their pastures, Bennett and Fara slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they needed in each other, and that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming.